introductions, remember?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, or good whatever time of day it is to everyone. I'm Caroline Moore. I'm Chair of IATEFL's Electronic Committee, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Madeleine du Vivier's session on preparing an effective IATEFL conference presentation. Madeleine is the Teacher Training Coordinator at the Centre for Languages and International Education at University College London. And as well as that, Madeleine is a past president of IATEFL and has been involved in various ways in the conference planning and so forth. So she is probably one of the real experts on what to do and what not to do with a presentation at IATEFL, which is why we have invited her to do this session today. Madeleine expects to talk for 10 to 15 minutes. And then there will be a chance for her to answer your questions at the end. So you have the chat room where you will be supported by myself and also Sean Wilden, who's also in the Electronic Committee and will be well known to many of you, many guises, including his work for the LTSIG. You also have the chance of posting questions in the Q&A pod. You'll only be able to see your own question, and Madeleine will do her best to answer those questions at the end. So if you have any problems, write down your problem and put it in the chat box. Any questions for Madeleine, you put them in the Q&A pod. So I will switch myself off and hand over to Madeleine.
Great. Okay, well, I hope everybody can hear me all right. As Caroline said, my name's Madeleine du Vivier, and actually this is my second webinar for IATEFL. We're doing this one today because a lot of you are probably now turning your thoughts to preparing for your presentation in Birmingham this April. So with that in mind, there are here are the aims and the outcomes for today's session. The first one is to explore how you can prepare your presentation to maximise its success at the conference. And the second one, therefore, the outcome is to ensure that your session is a great success at the conference itself. The data for this webinar is based on feedback submitted by conference delegates from Manchester 2015 about the presentations that they attended. This feedback reflects comments made in previous years. I'm going to look at 6 different things to consider when preparing your presentation based on frequently reoccurring feedback, and which, if a presenter takes into account when preparing their session, whatever type it is, will result in the presentation being a real success. So, here's the first one, I hope. There might be a bit of debate about this one, as it's also important to adapt what you're saying as you go along to the audience's particular context. But it is key to know what your framework and content for the presentation is. This will avoid negative feedback along the lines of delegates want to maximise the time that they have at the conference, and by planning exactly what you want to cover will allow them to do this during your session. So the second thing is to ensure that what you say matches the information you provide in your abstract in the programme. This is a really common theme in feedback from delegates, both as a positive and a negative. As mentioned just now, delegates choose which talks to go to based on the abstracts in the programme, and are really positive when the two match, as evidenced by feedback such as. However, all too often delegates can find that the content doesn't match, which can be really frustrating, particularly when they have chosen to attend the session over another one which they're really interested in. A similar comment is sometimes made about sessions which are focusing on a commercial product, for example, a publication or a public exam, because in the abstract it's not clear that this is going to be the case. For example, a comment like this disappoints the audience they've gone to hear a session about speaking skills, and then they discover that actually they're at a commercial presentation. So a good start when planning your session is to revisit the abstract you submitted in September and to start planning the content from there. So, on to the third point. Ensure that your audience are able to relate what you say to their own contexts. Delegates generally want to see how the content, particularly when the session is based on presenting results of research, can apply in practice to their own contexts. So comments such as this are really welcome. However, sometimes they're not quite so positive. A good way to achieve the first set of feedback, the excellent theory plus practical application, is to to start your presentation by finding out how the audience are involved in ELT, or what experience they've had of the focus of your presentation. A quick show of hands is all that it takes, a couple of questions. But this means that you can refer to this during your session and so make the content relevant to the participants in the room. Right, let's move on to point 4. This is a key one, and comments such as this covered everything they said in the time they've allocated time, unfortunately are rare, and it's much more common to hear or to read comments like this. This is definitely a problem of planning and frequently occurs because the speaker spends too long on their introduction and so runs out of time to present the most important part of their talk. The result of this is that the sessions are rushed, particularly towards the end. Speakers skip slides, speak too quickly, or generally get flustered. And this comment applies to both experienced and less experienced speakers. In fact, all the comments do. So something which I personally find very helpful is to produce a session plan, which includes timings for each stage and notes of what I can omit if time is running short. Right, the 5th point that I'd like to focus on is this. It's quite hard as a delegate to attend 7 or more sessions a day, but they often want to because attending the annual IATEFL conference can be a rare and valuable opportunity for them. So it's important to plan to keep the audience engaged throughout your session. One way of doing this, whether you're planning a talk or a workshop, is via the use of focused discussion stages. Sessions which successfully do this receive feedback such as, and avoid comments such as this. Overall, it's true to say that delegates appreciate sessions where they can go away with practical ideas to implement in their own context. If you're planning a workshop, it's essential that it's based on activities and that the plenary stages contain input from you. This also applies to talks, as short discussion stages can allow participants to apply the theory to their own contexts. So let's move on to think about 2 other practicalities, the first of which is this one. These days, a session doesn't seem to be complete without the use of PowerPoint slides, but feedback shows that they need to be used with caution. Frequent comments include the following. There were too many slides. The presenter relied too heavily on them, just talked their way through them basically. They read out everything that was on the slides, just as I am now, in this particular section, and also this one. And if you can't read it, it says the text was too small to read. Okay, and that was done deliberately. Okay. From a personal point of view, I often find initially produce a lot of PowerPoint slides, but I've found that if I do a dry run of the presentation or talk it through with a colleague, I can quickly work out which ones are not essential to the session and which ones are. I've also learnt that they need to be produced in at least font size 24. The other thing to consider is this, handouts for the session. It's important to decide if you're going to use handouts or not. This is definitely popular with delegates, as they provide an alternative to looking at PowerPoint slides on the screen all the time, and they also allow them to digest the content more easily and help make it easier to understand, and also they can use them to make notes. However, I know it can be difficult to decide how many copies to make, but a way around this is to make a minimum number and then provide delegates with an email address or website address where they can download the handouts later after the conference. Finally, the last thing to do is to think about your delivery. As I've already mentioned, delegates can attend more than 7 sessions a day if they so wish, and many do. So it's really important that the session is well delivered. This is reflected in the many, many positive comments that we receive, which you can see zapping through here. Well delivered, interesting, useful, excellent, etc. These comments come up again and again, but unfortunately so do their negative equivalents. So things like nothing new, poorly organised, poorly delivered, rushed, etc. can also be heard. But if you want to achieve these ones in green, then you can do this through careful and considered planning of your session. Once you've planned the session, a rehearsal is invaluable, even as in my case, if it's to your dog on the sofa, which is my preferred mode of preparation. Somehow a cat has sneaked in there as well. So to conclude, there are some key things to remember when preparing your session. First, produce a session plan with estimated timings on it and bring a clock or a watch because they're not often in the rooms themselves. Check the content of your session against what you wrote in your abstract. Start by finding out who your audience are. I quite often do that at the beginning while people are coming in. Plan to ensure that you enable the audience to apply your content to their context. And be realistic about how much you can cover and decide at the planning stage what you can omit if time is running short. If your session is a workshop, include plenty of active audience participation based around tasks. And if your session is a talk, then include enough time for audience participation and questions. Plan to use an appropriate number of slides which are going to be visible to the audience. And plan how you are going to integrate those slides into your presentation. Decide if you're going to use handouts. And finally, practice giving your presentation to an audience who can actually give you feedback, not just fall asleep, stay asleep like my dog does during them. And that is the end of my presentation. So now what happens?
Madeleine.
Hello.
Hello, I'm back again.
Been a bit lonely.
Well, thank you very much, Madeleine. We have a few questions, but before you start answering them, we have only about 4 questions. So if anyone else has any questions or comments they would like to make, please put them, write them, type them into the Q&A pod. But first come, first serve. So over to you, Madeleine.
So I click on the question.
On the question, and it's good to say who asked the question as well.
Okay, so I'm going to have to put my glasses on now. I'm really sorry. The first question is from Rehearsal Bolteva from Uzbekistan. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Sorry. Do I need to read it out because people can't see it? Or?
I think so, yes, because no one else can read it.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So is it possible to give a talk to participants, a task, to participants like creating a poster as a group work, 4 to 5 participants? I mean, will there be tables to write on or just chairs? Okay, 2 things there. So there will only be chairs. There won't be tables. So you'd have to get people to sort of spread the paper between them. This would be obviously for a workshop, and it could be a useful thing to do. It is quite time consuming and you have 45 minutes. But if it's a central task, then that would be quite appropriate, as long as you do then provide feedback and input based on what the participants have produced. Shall I go on to the second one, Karen?
Yes, please do. Oh, we've got lots of questions now. Great.
Okay. How do I do that? Okay, so this is from Patricia Santos. How much time should I allow for a talk? Well, you are given 30
Forum.
minutes.
I'm sorry, no.
You're given 30 minutes. But that doesn't mean, and this is one of the problems highlighted earlier, that, oh, it's gone away. Okay. Sorry. So it doesn't mean that you talk for 30 minutes, because you won't get through everything. There isn't a chance then for the participants to actually sort of absorb and reflect on what they've heard. So I would say you're planning for about 20 minutes with a 10-minute discussion at the end, or maybe 8 minutes at the end, and some little bit of pair work in the middle. But it's always less time than you think it's going to be. Shall I go on to the next one? Caroline?
Yes, please.
Okay, so how to prepare for a forum. You will be contacted by IATEFL and told there will be somebody who's nominated as a sort of forum leader, I think they're called, or convener. And then you can work together via email and talk about what you're going to do and how they link. We did forums for the first time last year, and it was hugely successful. The feedback from them was really, really positive, and I went to several, and they were able to really link what they were saying from a different point of view for each thing, and there was lots of time planned for participation, so they were really useful. So where shall I go now, Caroline? The top one, or?
Let me see. I think if we stay in the order, so the next person was Patrick Curry, I think.
Yeah, it's me that's deleting them as she answers them.
As we go along. Okay, that's great.
I really confused it. All right, so hi, Patrick. Yes. Patrick's written, I'll be presenting along with Sarah Milligan. Our session will be to 40 people max, with discussion opportunities. Would you say it's better to divide to 4 groups of 10 groups of 4, or even pairs? Right, well, I think groups of 10 is just too big, so you wouldn't manage that. I would say that groups of 4 would work, because then you'd have fewer people to handle feedback and monitor too. So, 3s and 4s. I think would probably work. Be easier to handle than having, I can't do the maths, but having them work in pairs. Right, shall I go to the next one?
So, yeah, Raquel.
Any suggestions on how to find out who the audience are? Well, what I do is I just, I say, okay, how many of you work as teachers? How many work as trainers? Are you involved in management? Have you been teaching for more than 5 years? And people just put their hands up, and they're really happy for you to find out, and it means that you can then relate your comments back to them. So things like, are you a materials writer? Do you work in the UK? Do you teach teenage, younger learners, etc.? And also I use the time just as people come in to do that as well. It doesn't take so long, and it's really, really useful when you're trying to focus on your answers. How many PowerPoint slides? Sorry, I've forgotten the names here. So this is from Nuki from Kosovo. Should be included in the 50. That's a very good question. I think it depends what you're saying. It's gone now. Okay, it depends what you're saying, and that's why I tend to start off with about this webinar. I think I started off with 16, and by the time I came down, had practiced it a few times, we came down to 11. So I would have thought probably about 12. It depends how much you've got on there, but certainly don't overdo them, because if you've got so many talks you're going to, it just becomes exhausting to read them. Shall I go to Patty? Caroline?
Yes, please.
I'm giving a talk, so as you suggested, consider time for audience questions. What about if the audience needs more time? Will it be useful to get in my last slide, my email, have it later? I think you need to decide what you can cut before your last slide. You probably need your last slide. So it's probably better to think, well, actually, I don't need to do this, and to plan it like that. So I would have thought, if you're doing a 30-minute talk and within about 15 minutes you realise that they've got a lot more to say, then decide what you can cut out in the next 10 so that you get to the last bit. Can we use slides? Yes. People use
This is from Govinda. Yeah.
Sorry, Govinda Puri. Yes. People use slides in talks, and as we've seen from the feedback, they tend to overuse them as well. So yes. How to make interactive? Well, I guess once you've presented your results, then a couple of discussion questions. So, have you done, well, you didn't know if they've done research before, but how could these results apply to your context? People discussing twos and threes, and you get a bit of feedback from that. That would make it interactive. How many
Next one from Patricia. Wait a minute, stop. No. So, can you remember to read out the name of the questioner and the full question, please, Madeleine?
Can't you do that?
Oh. I can do if you want.
Okay, well,
do you want me to do that?
You do that, because I'm getting confused.
Okay, right. So, Patricia Santos, how many people usually attend a talk?
Well, that's an interesting question. It depends on the size of the room and on the topic, and it's very, very difficult to anticipate that. So I haven't got an answer, I'm afraid. It could be 100, it could be 10. It really depends on the topic. Sorry.
And who else is presenting and what time of day? Lots and lots of variables, isn't it?
Yes, I do think that the time of day, though, that if it's something you want to go to, you go to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's just, it really depends on the topic and who's there, and if there are lots of similar sessions in the program on a similar kind of topic. So. Right.
Next question from Raquel Collio, who says, hang on. I was thinking perhaps putting a flipboard up, and upon entrance, each participant would tick a box.
To create a tally? I'm not quite sure what that one is. Unless it's a question notation, I'm not sure.
Raquel, do you want to follow that question up in the chat box?
Yeah.
Sorry. She's typing now.
Hang on.
Hang on. Where am I?
Yeah, so Raquel Collio is thinking of putting up a flipboard. So I think what she's thinking of is when people come into the room, they'll see this board.
We've already answered it. It was to find out who was in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
thank you, Raquel.
Right, so we go on to Mercedes in Argentina. I have to present a talk for 30 minutes, Q&A included. Does it mean I have to think of taking 20? I would say you're thinking about leaving 10 minutes. I think the input is max 20 and 10 minutes. And you might want to, as I say, it depends on your topic, but you may want to punctuate it with a short discussion stage after 10 minutes, just to get to allow people to process it. It very much depends on what you're talking about, but definitely allow for 10 at the end, because you can always bring extra things in if you find you've got a couple of minutes left. They are very strict at the conference about, the monitors are very strict about people finishing on time, because there'll be another presenter waiting to come in to the room. So this gentleman is Suganthi in India. So we've said our workshop is for a certain audience and a certain number. So do then go and preparation. Well, if you've asked for a restricted talk or a restricted workshop and you have said 30, you will be in a room that takes 25, 30. And you can say to the monitor outside, or the steward outside, I only want 30 people in there, and that is absolutely fine. You may get fewer than 30, again, depending on the topic and the time and who else is speaking, but we can definitely, the steward can definitely stop people coming in after the room, after you've reached your 30. Yeah.
Next question's from Mohammed, and who asks, can the presentation be in the form of Q&A?
No, actually it can't. You have an abstract and you're saying you're going to cover some content, and that content has to be covered first. You can take questions and answers at the end, so as I say, for 10 minutes or so, but there does need to be an initial an information stage at the beginning.
Thank you. And the next one from Araceli from Mexico. What are some absolute don'ts doing a presentation? Sometimes, as a non-native speaker, I feel I could do something I would regret.
I think the don'ts are the ones that I've outlined, and it doesn't matter whether you're an L1 or an L2 speaker at all. It's things like, not having enough time, not having clear handouts, not sticking to your abstract. Really, really, that's really important. I think that's fine, actually.
And now from Suganthi from India. Also, do workshop venues have room for the audience to move around and do, say, a mingle?
Yeah, they should do. Yeah. I mean, the rooms in Birmingham are nice, and people have put it, if you've asked for 30, then there should be enough space to move around, absolutely. Nothing is fixed. It's all movable chairs and flat floors, apart from a few lecture theatres, actually. Right.
I think Patricia is more of a thanks for the answers, so we'll move on to Patty Salguero from Peru. I'm giving a talk, so as you suggested, I should consider time for audience questions, participation. What about if the audience needs more time? Would it be useful to get in my last slide, my email, to have it later?
I answered that earlier.
Okay. Right, we'll delete that.
Bernadette.
Yep.
Bernadette.
So shall I read out Bernadette's question? Right. Would you say that it's best to give a session talk from memory or keep notes handy with key points? Since reading from slides is bad.
Yeah, definitely keep notes handy with key points, because otherwise you can forget the key points, and then the presentation can lose focus. What I tend to do is that I've got the session plan with the keynotes in it, and then I obviously practice it a lot at home with the dog, and then I respond to the participants. But it's very important to know what you're going to say, and well, certainly in my case, my memory is not what it was. Right, should we have Uma?
From Uma, supposing the questions are out of context or unintelligible.
Yeah, well, you do get that sometimes, and you just have to, as you would with a student in a classroom. So I think that's quite an interesting point, but perhaps I could talk to you about it afterwards, or if you think it's something that you need to pursue, then ask them to rephrase it. So yes, I think that's what I would do.
And from Mohammed Ashfaq, is there a criterion to select presenters for IATEFL?
Well, as you know, that there's a preview, there's guidelines, and people have to follow all the criteria in there. And in there also is there are suggestions of how to make your presentation successful. Yeah.
And from Dora Kutukis, how many tasks can we plan in a workshop so as not to overdo it?
Well, a workshop's 45 minutes. And so I would have thought, if it depends on the type of task and how detailed it is, I would have thought, I don't know, 2, 3. It really does depend on what you want to do. Something that IATEFL does for first-time speakers is that they have a mentor system. That's true, Caroline, yeah? Caroline?
Yes, we do.
So if it's something that you want to talk to somebody about, who's an experienced, or maybe more experienced presenter, then IATEFL can put you in touch with that person. That's quite useful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can whether you can set it up now. It's usually something you tick a box.
Oh, okay.
In the when you submit your proposal. Equally, if you are a more experienced presenter, then you can tick the box saying that you're willing to be a mentor, and that can be rewarding. If you are a mentor, I think it's important you make sure you go to the presentation. We've had feedback on that as well, and that you are supportive. Our next question, how much time we've got? I think we should allow ourselves about 5 to 10 more minutes maximum. So can I ask people not to submit any more questions so we can get through what we've got?
Questions? It's very good.
They're great questions. We just got lots of them.
Right.
So Suganthi from India.
This lady says thank you, so that one's all right.
All right.
What about
this one we haven't answered from Suganthi. Are we planning to collect samples of language from? Oh, sorry. Also, we are planning to collect samples of language from Indian business English students. Do we have facilities to play them?
Yes.
loudspeakers in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you can play audio and video.
Yeah, absolutely. What about Mohammed here? Do you want to read that one out?
Yep, will do. Yes. What should be the standard font size of PowerPoint?
A minimum of 24, and it can go as high as, what did you say, 34 or 38? I can't remember. We talked about
I didn't.
full session, or maybe it was.
I think you can go up to 60 if you win. Whatever will fit on your.
Minimum of 24. 24,
Yeah, that's the thing to think about.
30. Some of these are big rooms. Yeah.
They are. And remember, when you're doing PowerPoint, sometimes if you start adding more text in, it scrunches it up without you realizing. So you do check your point size.
Yeah. What about Patty?
What does Patty? If my talk is about a project. Oh, sorry, this is continued.
Something else. That must be in relation to.
Sorry, we're a bit stuck there.
Okay, so where shall we move to? What about Govinda?
I think to Govinda has one more query. How to make sure the number of participants in the presentation? I don't quite understand that. How do we know? Or how can we restrict?
So Govinda, if you're still in the room, could you expand on your question, please? Use the chat box, and
we'll come back to it.
Okay. What
Okay,
about?
we'll move on to Raquel then.
Mm-hmm.
So Raquel Colio, if you are presenting a workshop, shall all question time be included within the session instead of leaving time in the end?
Well, it has to all be included in the 45 minutes. I think with a workshop, because a workshop is task-based, then you would be handling feedback to the tasks as you go along. Yeah. So they might, I don't know what the workshop would be, but if it was, I can't think of anything on the top of my head, but if it was on, for example, I recently, a couple of years ago, did one on ways of handling feedback, and they did a task, and then we got feedback on that, and then we did another task. So I think it's important that you punctuate what they do with these focused feedback and discussion stages. Yeah.
Sorry, Govinda, thank you for typing again, but I'm still not sure of your question. You say how to make sure the participants, but the participants are what? Could you give us that bit? Thanks. Sorry, back to you.
Back to Patricia Santos. How should the seating be if it's a small group? I guess it depends if it's a talk or a workshop. I mean, the chairs are movable, but then you're not going to be able to move them that much. Mm-hmm. So I think if you have a small group of participants coming, I always make people move to the front. I don't know why people are so resistant. I always sit at the front because I can't hear or see. So I think you just have to be quite insistent and say, look, can you come to the front, please? I'd be really grateful. And then the IATEFL audiences are delightful. I did my first talk ever at IATEFL, and they are really, really nice. And people will always do that for you. So don't be afraid of asking, I guess. Now, Patrick's asking, a lot of people recommend using...
Read it out? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can read it out.
Okay. A lot of people recommend using a prop, a book or a clipboard. Would you recommend this, as people often don't know what to do with their hands when speaking?
I don't often do talks, actually. I tend to do workshops, so I don't know if that's a good idea or not. The only thing about using a clipboard is it could slightly get in the way, could it? Caroline, what would you say?
You could end up waving it around like this.
Yeah.
Actually, thinking about your advice on rehearsals, that's a good way, particularly if you do it with a good critical friend. They can give you feedback on irritating, what do you call it, habits.
A prop or a book, because it's just going to look a bit odd. It's a bit like teaching. You probably wouldn't do that if you were teaching. So, yeah, I think rehearsal is key in that one.
I know Govinda's question now.
Oh, what is it?
Brilliant.
It's about handouts. So it was how do you know how many handouts to bring, basically? Because if you don't know your audience size.
Oh, okay. Well, that was the point that I made earlier, is that I would say that if you haven't asked, for a restricted session talk, then I would say maybe 30. And then if there are more people there, you can either give them your email address, or you can give them a website link that you've got, and they can download them from there. I mean, I've done that in the past, and it's actually really quick to email people the slides, because you just have a standard message and you send the email out. So that's what I did last time, and it was fine. So where
Okay.
are we now?
We've got 7 questions. I think we can manage, but no more, please. From Mohammed, how would you summarize a successful presentation in 1 sentence?
Could it be a very long sentence? Well, it has to be well planned. It has to match the abstract. All the things we said at the end. It really does have to tick all those boxes, and it's really, really important. The most important thing is that it's clearly delivered, and it does what you said you were going to do, and it's relevant to the participants. I can't get it down any less than that, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Madeleine. And from Irina in freezing Moscow, have you had presenters whose English was not very good, not perfect, and yet they managed to make a successful workshop?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's not to do with people's level of English and not perfect, or anything to do with that. It's to do with how well organised they are and how much they have practiced it. Because you sit in the room and you're looking at the clock and you're thinking, okay, we've got 10 more minutes to go and we haven't got beyond the introduction. And that's not to do with English, that's just to do with the fact they haven't actually planned it in enough detail. Right.
Okay. I'm just having a look. We've got a couple from Patty Salguero. I think it's this one here. Would it be useful to record ourselves for checking, and I can't understand the rest of that.
Improving it. Yes.
Improving, that's it.
Yes. I mean, for this webinar, with the webinar, I write the text because time is short, I know that. But I have spent quite a lot of time practicing it, and I think Caroline would say that it's much better today than it was when we started on Friday. So I also show what I'm going to plan. I showed this text to other people within IATEFL. When I'm planning a session, I show it to my colleagues because it's very difficult to stand back. So I think that yes, I would record it. I would do whatever you feel is best in order to feel comfortable when you're doing it, really.
And here's a question from Maria Barbary in Greece. When are the mentoring sessions going to start? I remember ticking the mentor box in my application.
I think that information will come through when you get information about the time and the room size of your session. I think
it comes about a month before the conference.
Yeah.
Because I was matched with a mentee last year.
Yeah, my colleague was as well, and it was really rewarding on both sides, I think.
Yeah. I think it's important for people on both sides of the equation, if you're a mentee or a mentor, that you really commit yourself to that relationship, that you reply, you do communicate with each other. And if you're the mentor, you do your absolute best to go to the session.
Yeah.
I've had feedback on that.
Here's one here.
Last one from the Mercedes Polinia. I'm a scholarship winner. Brilliant. Can I open thanking some people, or should I go straight into the presentation?
I think you can say. I think you can just say thank you very much to IATEFL or whoever it is, for giving me the opportunity to be here, and I've won this scholarship. Sometimes the scholarship winners are also introduced by people, are they, Caroline? Or is that
depending on the scholarships? Yes, sometimes they are.
And I think you should move straight in. Because that's what people have come to hear. They've come to hear what you've got to say.
We certainly know that there are certain groups of scholars, for instance, people who win Hornby Scholars, where you find other scholarship winners also come along to your talk and you go along to each other's talks, and that's rather nice. And I think this is really needs to be our last question from Govinda. So whom should we contact if technical problems occur during the presentation? For example, the projector or the internet going wrong.
It's very simple. There will always be a steward or several stewards outside the rooms where you are. You just open the door, get one of them, and the ICT support at the conference centre is excellent. and there will be somebody there, you know, as quickly as they can be, a couple of minutes. And there'll be people there to help you set up before, etc. So I think that the ICT support is the technical support. Great. Are there any other? And look at all these people chatting to each other.
Can I pass on 3
Indeed.
pieces of advice that came up during the chat while you were talking?
Absolutely.
Please, yeah.
I can't remember who said them, but I saw them go through them. Somebody said one of the questions you asked was about making research more interactive, and somebody said, well, one way to do that would be to create polls in the talk, either mobile phone or hand, which I thought was a good idea. Of course, the handout idea could be solved, as people said, by just putting your email on the last slide.
Yeah, that's
So a lot of people said that, and Madri's advice is key. Make sure you get there early to set up.
Yeah, check out the room the day before or a few hours before. They're always empty, or pretty much always empty in the breaks and at lunchtime. So even if your session's the next day, it just gives you a feel for where you're going to be. But I think the most important thing is that you need, particularly if it's your first time, IATEFL audiences are really, really great and really, really fun. And you know, I've always had a really positive experience talking at IATEFL. There you go. Do we have anything else from you, Sean?
Oh, sorry, no, I just thought I'd pass that back because I saw them as I was typing in the chat box.
It's very helpful. I can't stand all these people here.
I don't know, but I've just given Madeleine, I hope you don't mind, but I've just put, thinking of polls, I've just put one on the screen, which is, are you presenting at IATEFL Birmingham? I thought it would be a good way of ending.
Can I do
that?
We techies are good at this kind of thing, you know, Madeleine.
I do wish I was technically minded. It is a huge weakness of mine, I'm afraid. Anyway, there you go.
Okay, in a moment, so if people would like to vote in a moment, I will broadcast the results of that poll. But so far, we've had 50 people respond. So when I've got another 20 or so, I'll broadcast that.
I mean, as one of the people before said, you know, they may not be presenting at IATEFL, but actually these suggestions are relevant to any conference that you go to. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll broadcast those so you can now see. Can everyone see the results of the poll now?
It says 69.2. I don't really understand.
About 36 people, so 2/3 of this audience are presenting at Birmingham and 1/3 are not, and I guess are presenting at other conferences, which is absolutely fine. Anyway, I would like to thank Madeleine for her wonderful presentation. And I'd also like to thank Sean for helping me host and facilitate this session. And I'd also like to thank our fantastic audience. And I look forward to seeing many of you at Birmingham and hopefully attending your wonderful presentations. We'll be recording, we are recording this presentation and we will upload it onto the IATEFL website with the PowerPoint as soon as we can, but probably in the next 24 hours. And that's the end. Thank you.